Well, good afternoon, church family. Hope you're enjoying this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Have you ever wished you could go back and undo your mistakes? Right? Like take a mulligan in life? Well, it's true you can't go back and unwind your mistakes, but praise the Lord, He does give second chances. And the book of Jonah really demonstrates this so well. When we come to Jonah chapter number 1, we see Jonah running from God. Chapter 2, we see Jonah running to God. And by the time we get to chapter 3, we see Jonah running for God. And I want to begin reading in verse number 1 of Jonah chapter number 3. The Bible says, "The word of the Lord came unto Jonah the second time, saying, Arise, go unto Nineveh, that great city, and preach unto it the preaching that I bid thee. So Jonah arose and went unto Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceeding great city of 3 days' journey." And by the time we get to chapter 3, we see a second chance for both Jonah and for Nineveh. We see God's mercy in His ability to salvage the life of one of His servants, and also in His ability to provide salvation for the nation of Nineveh. It was in December of 1914, the famed inventor Thomas Edison, his entire plant went up in flames. He lost nearly $1 million in equipment, and all of the research was gone. It was after this, though, that Thomas Edison was quoted as saying, "There is value in disaster. All of our mistakes are burned up, and we can start fresh anew." Here, Jonah had made a disaster of his life. You know the story, him running from God, being tossed overboard, swallowed by the whale. Jonah had made a disaster of his life, but God was about to give him a new start. God was going to let Jonah start anew. Think about that. After Jonah ran from God, associated himself with those pagan sailors, really attempted suicide. He wasn't planning on God sparing his life with the whale. He was ready to die. Attempting suicide. After all of that, God still wanted to use him. God was still pursuing after Jonah. The whale wasn't his punishment. The whale was salvation. It was God's provision for him. God never gave up on his plans for Jonah. He wasn't just forgiven, but then kind of cast aside. Like, okay, I'll forgive you, but don't ever ask me for anything. Don't expect me to use you. No, apart from the phrase, the second time, you really wouldn't be able, you'd never suspect that Jonah had ever run from God. God didn't say, okay, arise, go into Nineveh and preach, and don't blow it like you did last time. Don't mess it up again like you did the last time. No, it's just like Jesus' story of the prodigal son. You know, on the prodigal son, after messing up his life and wasting his substance in riotous living, he begins his trip back home, and he's got it all planned out in his mind what he's going to say. Right? He's practicing and rehearsing his speech. "Father, I've sinned against heaven. I've sinned against you. I'm not worthy to be a son. Just make me a servant." You can hear him all the way home. "I've sinned. I'm not worthy to be a son. Just make me a servant. I'm not worthy to be a son. Just make me a servant. I'm not worthy to be a son. Just make me a servant." And before he can even get on the property, his father sees him, and he runs and he throws himself on him and calls for a robe and a ring to be put on his finger, and calls to be kill the fatted calf and to celebrate. And that's exactly what we see happening here in the life of Jonah. When Jonah repented, when Jonah obeyed, God used him yet again. So listen to me, for everyone that has failed in the past, there is a forgiveness that forgets. My new favorite song, as of late at least, is a song by the Amen Quartet. I think the title of it's "Everything He Forgot." And don't worry, I'm not going to sing it for you. I'd hate to get fired as soon as we start back live again. But the words of the chorus just go something like this. It says, "There'll come a day when I see Him in glory, and I'll only recall Calvary's side of my story, where my sin was forgiven, my past was erased, my sin was forgiven, my salvation was bought. Oh, what a moment when I can't remember everything He forgot." And I'm telling you, what an amazing truth that God chooses to forget our sin. And so Jonah received a second chance. He received a second chance at surrender. Verse 3 again, it says, "So Jonah arose and went unto Nineveh according to the word of the Lord." Jonah was faced with a second chance to surrender his will to God's will. Did you notice that God's command didn't change? God never altered His command to try to meet Jonah in the middle. No, God in His holiness remains firm. He stays where He's at. And Jonah was faced with a second chance to yield his will to God's will. But not only that, God gave him a second chance at service. Verse 2, he says, "Arise, go into Nineveh, that great city, and preach unto it the preaching that I bid thee." The command stayed the same. It's almost verbatim. And yet here, God's giving Jonah a second chance to go back to Nineveh and preach and be used of God to bring about a revival, to bring about salvation to the nation of Nineveh. You know, serving God is not based on your past achievements or your past failures. It's based on the grace of God. It's all of God's grace that any of us get to serve him. And Jonah goes on to become a picture of the power of resurrection. Think about it. Jesus himself is going to use this story to picture his resurrection from the grave. And so God will go on to use Jonah to accomplish one of the greatest miracles in all of the Bible. The entire nation of Nineveh repents. So whatever is in your past, there is mercy to be found in the Lord. Turn to him, confess your sin, and move forward. I love how someone once put it. They said, yesterday ended last night. And so whatever is in your past, there is with God a forgiveness that forgets. So perhaps today you need a new start. I encourage you to discover God is gracious and compassionate. So much so that he is not content to leave you as you are, but will lead you to become what you must. And so God is a God of second chances. Don't allow the devil to use your past, the failures, the mistakes, the weights, the burdens of your past to keep you from serving God today and in the future. May God bless you. Have a great day.